Hey everybody, how's it going? Today we're doing a little bit different. I'm going to be taking you folks on a tour of a wetland. Now why wetlands, you ask? Well, they're pretty cool places and I like to visit them a lot. Complex and numerous, wetlands and their diverse inhabitants play an important role in the health of the forests of the Canadian Shield. Well, why are wetlands important to the Canadian Shield? Well, first you have to understand the Canadian Shield and what it is. The Canadian Shield is a large strip of land of rock that goes along the northeastern part of Canada and down along the eastern seaboard of the United States. What the Canadian Shield was, it's the footbase of ancient mountains. A long time ago, before there was life on this planet, these were some of the largest mountains in the world. As time goes, they whittled down, they got brought down to this little stumps, and things overgrew. And these wetlands were once covered in a rainforest when North America was somewhere else, closer to the equator. As the Ice Age comes, glaciers descend upon North America and push and scrape away all of the live soil that we have in the forest here, pushing it down to places like southern Ontario and the Midwest. What that left was bare rock, just the base of the mountain. A lot of the exposed rock you see on Lake Superior are examples of this, and this rock behind me. So how can life exist in a place with rock like this? Well, there needs to be water. But when there's slopes and angles, and the water doesn't absorb into the soil, it just runs off. So, we come to wetlands. Wetlands are places where water sets and settles, and the rest of the life of the forest can live off of it. So, a little barren here, but we're about to see much more lush, much more life. Yeah. Alright, now you know. Let's go. So standing water, lakes, ponds, marshes, what's the difference? Like what's the difference between a puddle and a bog? Let's go find out. So I guess I should define how much wetlands define the character of the Canadian Shield and Canada in general. 16% of Canada's landmass is wetlands. Now it doesn't sound like a lot, but Canada is a very big country. That equals out to about 1.5 million square kilometers. Something about the size of Quebec. So that's a lot of land, that's a lot of water, wetlands, right? And that's pretty much what defines a wetland. It's land that's wet. It is land that is going between water and land, has a little bit of both. Technically, a wetland is defined by not draining properly and being underwater for part or all of the year. So there's two types of wetlands that I look at because I'm not around saltwater, and that's a whole other world with wetlands. Around freshwater wetlands. So there's two categories. There are mineral wetlands and then there are organic wetlands. So mineral-based wetlands tend to have a bottom that is based off of sand or some other mineral, where organic wetlands tend to have a soil that is based off of organic matter, like peat moss or sphagnum or loam. Now the mineral types, there are two and a half types I should say. There's ponds. So ponds are very much like a pool, right? So you have a big basin with defined edges, full of water, and there might be some plants along the edges, and maybe inside there could be a little bit of lily pads or something like that. And then the other category of mineral based is a marsh. So marsh will be defined by patches of grass, flooding, those sorts of things, but it still doesn't have a lot of organic material in the soil. Then we go into the half one, which is organic and mineral, and it's swamps. And swamps are basically wet areas that are treed. So if it has a rich organic soil, it'd be an organic swamp, and if it has more of a sandy soil, it'd be a mineral swamp. Now the organic types are, I think, a little bit harder for me to figure out. But we have bogs and we have fens. So a bog is somewhere where it only gets water from rain or runoff, but there's no flow going directly into it and no flow going directly out of it. And a defining factor of bogs is they have a type of moss called Sphagnum or Peat Moss. That's a pretty neat thing too. It's a very cool organism. We'll talk about that a little bit. Now fens are very similar, and they have peat moss, lots of organic matter, but they tend to have a little bit of flow in and out of them. And because of that, they have a little bit less acidity in the soil. Acidity is caused by peat moss, and you can kind of think of it like tea. The longer you let your tea steep, the more bitter it gets, the more acidic the soil gets. So we're going to go check out this wetland here. It's I originally thought this part was a fen, but now it's has a little more water in it. Things are a little fishy. So I'm thinking there may be something strange at play, because wetlands are complex. Let's go check it out. Our first unique organism of the day, besides mentioning my old buddy Peat Moss, is an orchid. And it's one of my favorite flowers of the early summer. And it's called the pink lady slipper. And you can kind of see, it looks a little bit like a slipper, and it's pink. So, as with orchids, they like to grow in decaying plant matter. As for example, peat moss, or sphagnum. It's quite loamy here. You can tell it's growing in something. Here's roots growing all over organic matter. And these guys are here. Now, these plants really like wetlands because they have to have a lot of bees around, because they actually trick bees into fertilizing them. So most flowers, they have pollen, and they also have nectar. And the bees go after the nectar, but they get the pollen on them and they spread them from flower to flower, and then those flowers make more flowers. Well, since these type of flowers here live in a sort of place where they have to be really resourceful with their energy, they don't actually make a nectar, but they smell really nice. So in here, there's a little entrance. So the bee will come in here, it'll get in here and get trapped. Realize there's no nectar. It'll get trapped and bump around and get pollen all over it, and eventually it'll find its way out the top and go on to the next one. Now after a while, the bees clue into this and they stop going after these flowers. So this sort of flower needs a whole bunch of nests around for it to be able to reproduce sexually. Now these plants can also grow off nodes and rhizomes and spread that way, but in order for them to cover any ground and get spread out quicker, they need pollinators. So I think these plants are really neat. They're beautiful. Don't pick them, they take a long time to grow. Now they're one of my favorite plants, right here, right now. So this pretty good looking beauty here is the northern blue flag iris. It's another showy flower this time of the year in the wetlands. And you can find it in sedge meadows like this, along rivers like that, and along fens and bogs. And it's a pretty neat little flower just because of how nice it looks. But I also think it's neat how it spreads. But since this flower is always around water, its seeds make a pod, almost like a bean pod. And then it dries out and the seeds fall and they float. And they float in the water. So if they're along a little creek like this, they get into the water in the fall, usually when the water levels are a little higher because of rain, and they'll go downstream. And then get into lakes and spread that way. That's kind of neat, they're little voyagers. This is also the flower of Quebec. And lily is really what the fleur de lis was designed after, so kind of makes sense. Anyways, pretty little plant. Gonna leave it be. I think these are sedges. So one thing I have noticed here, so the soil's a little bit different. It's a little bouncy, kind of feels saturated. So I think this is a nice example of where peat moss buildup. So you folks may have heard of peat moss for gardening. Those of you that have compost and toilets, they use peat moss as well. And peat moss is a moss, as it sounds like. And it's unique to wetlands because it only grows in aquatic situations, or very wet situations, and its cells don't rot. So it'll continue accumulating and growing on the top layer as the dead ones accumulate down below, and it'll just keep growing up. Now peat moss is neat because its cells are made to absorb a whole bunch of water, so sometimes the peat moss can hold up to 26 times their mass in water. So I have a little demonstration here to show you folks, to show you just how much water peat moss can hold. And really the benefit of that to the wetland is that all this creek may dry up, but the peat moss will just protect all the moisture and slowly weep it out. So around those areas there'll always be a bit of moisture. So yeah, let's check this out because I think this is pretty neat. And if you folks may have seen these things before, they're used for gardening. So another neat thing about peat moss too is that it can filter water, and because peat moss gets acidic, it's also sterile. In World War I, they actually used peat moss to dress wounds, which I think is pretty cool. I wouldn't suggest doing that now unless you absolutely had to, but let's see here. All right, so you folks may have seen these before. The little peat moss pellets, and use them for gardening. And it's completely dried and compressed peat moss, as dense as it can be. And I'm going to show you folks how much water it can hold. So I have a little glass here, has some markings on there. I'm not going to use them, but it's substantial. It's substantial. That's a lot of water. I'm gonna dump some out. Tasty. Okay. So, pellet. Remember, it's not as fat as my finger. Alright, this is going to take a few minutes. It's pretty compact. We'll come back when this thing is fully inflated. So there we go. Our peat moss is steeped for a little while. There's not much water left in there. Let's pour it out there. You can see how my hand just holds this water here. I can't pour much in it. It's coming on through my fingers there, slowly seeping away. My hand kind of represents the Canadian Shield without organic soil. Now, I'm going to put this clump of peat moss here, which you can tell is much thicker than my finger now. Put it on there. Now from my hand, I'm holding much more water. So you can see I can squeeze it out. Much more than I can normally hold in my palm. And that's why peat moss is important to wetlands in the Canadian Shield. It helps it retain water. Hard times, this is where the water is. Now this part of this wetland has some peat moss, but I'm not sure if it's a half a meter thick, which is the technical standard for being an organic wetland. So I would say this wetland is almost more like bog curious. Not quite there, but given time and aging and standing water, it may become a bog or a fen. Peat moss and sphagnum moss are both considered manipulator species, which means they manipulate their environment to their advantage. This wetland we're at right now looks a little different than the last time I was here. Things have changed. So I suspect there may be another manipulator species at play. But before we check that out, let's go head into the uplands.
This massive maple leaf. This is a striped maple. It's more of a shrub. It doesn't make the canopy, it can't grow that high. But it grows really quick, and then once it gets near the top of the canopy, as far as it can grow, it'll just put a profuse amount of seeds out and spread that way. So these things make quite a bit of organic matter that accumulate up in the uplands, and quite often the mother plant will stem close to the wetlands because they want cool, wet soil.
So striped maple grow really quick, and they're kind of essential for maintaining proper structure of organic matter in the uplands. And they're very popular food for moose, porcupines, rabbits, and beaver. Beaver really like striped maple. They like eating the bark off of it. We're about to head back down onto the wetland now, and we're coming to near the end of it, that where it sort of drains out, and we're going to see what's going on here, because yeah, things are a little different than the last time I was here.
Ah, water. The essence of life. There's a lot of it here. Something's going on. I think we're figuring it out. This obstruction here blocking the water and causes it to build up is in fact the Beaver Dam. Beavers are the second largest rodents in the world, and they like to control their environment. They're what we consider keystone species. And keystone species affect their environment quite a bit compared to the amount of them there are. So this wetland may have maybe 3 beavers on it. They could change the environment and turn this, what may have been a fen, into a pond. Now you compare that to the amount of yellow hawkweed I have around me here. There could be thousands of them, but they aren't causing that much impact in the environment. And that's why beavers are considered keystone species. So as you can see here, this is quite flooded up. The water is probably about 4 or 5 feet higher than it normally is. And I would say, with all this rock here, this would be considered a pond. Further up the wetland, the things we saw earlier, they had a little bit more aspects of marsh and fens. There's even a little bit of swamp there with all the cedars along the shore. But wetlands are complex. There's a lot of moving parts and a lot of things going on. And they're constantly changing, just like the beaver. Beavers have cycles. So beavers will come to a wetland that is just a creek going through a bog or a fen. They'll block it up. They'll turn into a pond. Creates a safe environment for them so they can swim away from predators. And they build their beaver lodges or shelters to keep them safe during the winter. Eventually, the beavers cut down all the trees that they enjoy eating the bark of, the small ones, like striped maple, and then they eat them all up. They're all gone. So the beaver move on. They move to another wetland. The beaver dam breaks eventually without repair, and it turns back into a fen or bog again. Beavers are complex too. Looks great, but I know if I drink it, I'll probably get beaver fever. But I do know this water's clean, because wetlands are efficient at filtering water. They can clean out algae, heavy chemicals, fertilizer, all sorts of stuff. They can take it out of the water. In fact, a lot of wetlands are used in part of sewage treatment plants for major cities. Now it's hard to believe that this brown water ends up being the stuff we drink. This is all part of the process of water and how it is used and cleaned. It maintains life throughout the world.
So what place do wetlands have with mankind? Besides preserving our natural heritage, they prevent erosion. This is my city, Sault Ste. Marie, and it's surrounded by the Canadian Shield. The only thing keeping my city from being flooded constantly whenever it rains are the wetlands and the ravines draining into the city. They're an integral part of why we can prevent flooding in the city, and they're an integral part of our world. Wetlands are also contain 1/3 of the world's earth carbon. So, we talked about wetlands. We talked about the Canadian Shield and why there's so many wetlands there and why they're important. We talked about the unique inhabitants of wetlands and how they control their environment. And we talked about how wetlands affect the environments around them, are an important part of the Canadian Shield forest. No doubt in my mind that wetlands are an important and diverse part of the Canadian Shield with the help of their friends. Well, I hope that you folks, next time you pass by a wetland, you don't let the bugs bog you down. Come check it out. You might see some interesting things. You might even go for a swim. Anyways, I hope you folks enjoyed this. A little bit different video. First of this type to do. Might be a little rough around the edges, but it was really fun, and I hope you folks enjoy it. So give me some feedback. Let me know what you think. And if I got anything wrong, I probably didn't because I did a lot of research, but if I did, please let me know too, and we can correct that too. So anyways, have a nice day. Happy trails.